I'm going to invite Katie O'Callahan to come up and summarize what she, as a member of the FDA staff and somebody who's focused the past several years on bringing more patient-centered thinking to the agency's work, summarize for us today, and also share with us how FDA uses the kind of information that all of you have been so courageous and generous in sharing. So, Katie, welcome.
Thank you to Kim and to Adam and to the Sleep Association and everyone who was involved in putting this day together. It's certainly been a learning experience for me, as I'm sure it has been for all of you. I've been asked to provide a summary of some of what at least I learned and heard today, as well as Kim has asked me to speak about what does FDA do with the information that we learn in patient-focused medical product meetings and other interactions of this kind. So, but before I get started, I apologize, I missed the morning, so if this has already been done, please bear with me. I always think it's helpful to get an idea of who's in the room in terms of what perspective we represent. So if you are a patient, family member, caregiver, or patient advocate, could you please raise your hand? Wonderful. And I'm not the only FDA person. Who else here is from FDA? Okay. And I know we had a few more in the morning session who had to leave. What about industry consultant, past or present? Okay. Healthcare professionals? And let's see, scientific, academic, clinical, academic community. Okay, and anyone who I didn't include? Citizen scientists, wonderful. Okay, so part of why I do that is I think it's helpful to see that we really do have a mixture of perspectives here. People see things from different views, and we all, I think, at the FDA have been humbled over this many-year journey that Kim outlined to really recognize that patients and their families really are experts in the disease and the condition, and we're all really learning a lot from this community. So thank you for this meeting, which is a continuation in the journey for all of us. I think, the other reason I do that is to highlight that regardless of which stakeholder group you come from or represent, we do have a shared goal, which is to improve the health and quality of life for patients. And so that's what we have in common. That's why we're really all here today. That journey begins with listening and learning from the learned wisdom that patients and families have accrued over the period of time that they have been living with this condition. What is FDA doing with this? Well, for those of you who know FDA exists but may feel there's a bit of a black box in terms of how we operate, I like to simplify it and say that essentially we are looking at whether or not the benefits outweigh the risks. And we do that in consideration of the impacts of the untreated or undertreated condition on the patients, with a consideration of what the evolution of the state of the science and the state of technology is. And really, I think we're increasingly starting to be able to incorporate the patient perspective more substantially in that weighing of the benefits and the risks. And so there are three particular areas I want to highlight in terms of, concretely how are we using this in our work at FDA. The first is in the understanding. So in weighing the benefits and the risks, it's not in a vacuum. It's really in an understanding of the impact on patients. And so clearly, meetings like this deepen our understanding of that part of the picture, which is really critical. The second is the science of patient input. So more and more we're seeing an evolution and a maturation of the methods and the tools and our ability to do scientific studies. And the reason this is important for FDA and the scientific and clinical community is that as we do that, we're able to begin to elevate what we're hearing from the voices of patients in meetings like this to evidence that can stand alongside with the clinical studies and the other technical information that we look at when we consider these benefits and the risks. And that's really important in our evolution on this journey to be able to continue to do that. And the third is the recognition that patients and patient organizations, while they have always been involved in patient support and raising awareness in the population and raising funding for research, are really increasingly starting to actually get in the game of medical product innovation, which is critical because medical product innovation is a team sport. And in the early days, it was a team sport where we were all working together on behalf of patients, but now increasingly we're working with patients as partners in trying to improve this state of affairs for everyone involved. And so when I summarize what I heard today, I will try to draw parallels to those three areas because I think that might help us to, from our own perspective, from our own stakeholder view, think about what we can go back and be actionable upon. So I certainly have a much richer understanding of the impact of this condition on the daily lives of patients, of their families, of everyone in the household. And I don't have this condition, but as a mother of an 11-month-old, I can at least identify a little bit with the impact of long-term sleep deprivation. But I think we also learned a lot about the diagnostic odyssey, as I've heard it termed by some patients and patient advocates, where in some cases over 6 years, probably longer in some of the anecdotes that I heard today, before we really arrived at a proper diagnosis. Lots of delays, misdiagnosis, and other challenges with the actual process of the diagnostic process. The management, once we get to treatment, I did hear that quite a few patients eventually got to a point where treatment was working, but that, even having gone through the diagnostic odyssey, then there's learning how to use it properly, finding the right fit, all of that, the challenges that go along with that. And then barriers to sticking with the therapy, and also barriers in other arenas like financial barriers and access to treatment. So that's understanding. From the standpoint of the science of patient input, the opportunity for apps, given all the caveats that were mentioned, which are real, apps and other tools, they're evolving. They are getting better. And one of the most promising opportunities from the FDA's perspective, and with patient group involvement, I think we'll be able to accelerate that in ways that are useful. The promise of this is that we'll move from this peephole view that we get from a clinical visit to a much bigger picture view of the impact of the condition on the full scale of the patient's quality of life. And that will help us overcome some of these other barriers. There are also opportunities in some of the other areas of science of patient input that FDA is involved with, patient-reported outcomes, patient preference studies that may or may not be the right fit for this community, but we're certainly seeing increasing uptake across various patient communities in those scientific areas. But really the point I wanted to emphasize the most was the team sport. So I think there are a lot of potential opportunities to bring patient citizen scientists, patient innovators, patient people who have experience with the business aspects of healthcare and all of the other parts of the ecosystem that are involved to really get into the game and come together as a team to try to start to tackle some of these barriers collectively as a group. So those are my thoughts that I want to leave you with, and thank you again for allowing myself and the other FDA folks to be a part of the listening and learning for today.
Thank you so much, Katie. It's always, it's been a real honor and privilege to work alongside you and members of the CDRH team and the CEDAR team to see how far we've really come in respecting the roles and the opportunities that exist for people like this who have that lived wisdom, I love that phrase, to really, for you to benefit from them, for the life sciences innovators to benefit from this really rich experience. So thank you for pushing this forward at the regulatory end of things, and we'll all work harder to bring it to you on a nice silver platter. You'll even take a paper plate, I know you. Before I turn this over to Adam and Carl to make some closing remarks, I did want to point out these beautiful portraits along the sides of the room are provided to us by Gilles Friedman, who is a notable patient advocate and disruptor himself. He started a company called Smart Patients that some of you may know, along with Ronnie Zeiger. He's also a very renowned photographer and artist. He's taking portraits down in the lower level of the hotel if anybody, and we'll open that up to anybody, would like to have one of Gilles Friedman's originals. You're welcome to just take the staircase downstairs and we'll get you to the right place. He's got a little photo studio set up down there. And ASAA will be using these to just help paint the face of OSA more broadly. And with that, I will turn it over to Adam and Carl to wrap us up and make some closing remarks.
Sure. Age before me.
And Carl, I'm asked to have you put the microphone right here for
here?
the, no.
Thank you. My name's Carl Stepnowski, and I've been going to Awake group since 1996. That was my very first Awake group that I attended as a graduate student. The reason why I bring it up is because I learned more in that hour or hour and a half session with sleep apnea patients than I did being in a lab for the year before. And what I saw was a resilience. I saw innovation. I saw people who were taking care of themselves. And I learned a lot, and I learned so much in that time that it's amazing to think 22 years later, here we are having what we're calling the biggest Awake group we've ever had. Historically, the Awake group's been focused on sleep apnea. How long ago was it? 6 months, 9 months ago, Adam and I took a close look at it, and we said awake, alert, and keeping energetic. It's not just sleep apnea. And so Adam's been a huge driver of the ASA over the last 5 years and has really helped convince me to say it's just not sleep apnea. It's taking sleep apnea. It's about good sleep, and it's about good sleep health. And it's been an amazing journey over the last 5 years. So I just wanted to preface that preface my remarks with that. I also kind of wanted to more address some of the research that's been going on. I think I've always seen the power of the patients from that very first Awake group, and I've always been drawn to doing more applied kinds of research. But what I realized was, even though I was doing it side by side with Adam and Will and other patients, really has changed what I've done. And I think if we can continue and start to have the world's biggest sleep registry and all of our grand plans, it's going to be really something. So in terms of observations from today, want to do it under the framework of the sleep journey. And that's a phrase we use a lot because it truly is a journey that folks go through with sleep apnea. If we think about the journey from when the symptoms first started to diagnosis, that's a journey in and of itself, and we've heard a lot of those stories today. If we think about the journey from diagnosis to treatment, should be simple. It's clearly not. That's a journey in and of itself as well. And then even once on therapy, even once some folks are well established, it can continue to be a journey for a variety of reasons. Health changes, decisions to make treatment changes, et cetera. So when we put it all together, it's just a tremendous journey that all sleep apnea patients are on. I'm going to kind of cover some observations for each one of those three phases. It's simply taking too long for our healthcare industry to identify when someone should get that sleep study. What should potentially be days or weeks or maybe months, instead, folks, it's taking years, and we hear from the stories from this meeting, decades, and that's clearly too long. There's a lot of and we hope to be a driver to help shorten that time frame. The second aspect is the appreciation of daytime symptoms. I think one of the things we're hearing is that I've had daytime sleepiness and the effects of chronic sleep deprivation for years and decades. And when you have the chronic sleep deprivation for that long, just like Shelley said, it starts to break the body down. And we have to do a better job of appreciating that. We clearly heard that there's societal factors. There's lots of other reasons why we minimize the importance of sleepiness. It's macho to not do it. We heard that last night during our patient roundtable. But what I'll say for sleep apnea specifically is sleep apnea was recognized as a real disease when it was associated with mortality, when sleep apnea was associated with cardiovascular disease, when sleep apnea was associated with hypertension, and when sleep apnea was associated with diabetes. People think that those are hard outcomes, and so that means sleep apnea must be real. When we think about it, think about the stories we heard today for the effects of chronic sleep deprivation. We heard about career problems. We heard about performance problems. We heard about real car accidents. It doesn't get more real. The effects of sleepiness don't get more real than some of the stories we heard. And I don't know what it's going to take to elevate it so that it gets identified and recognized and dealt with earlier, but that's one of the things we'd like to do. And I think by telling it through the power of patient stories and the power of getting those stories out, just like we're doing here between portraits, interviews downstairs, writing the report from this, writing the report up from the survey, we need to get the word out about the real effects of sleepiness. It's going to be an uphill road. I remember Bill Dement walking onto Congress back at a sleep meeting about 18 or 20 years ago. I mean, this is something that's been tried. Don't know how to do it, but we're going to give it a try. And then the last observation are treatment options. Clearly, for folks who have fairly severe sleep apnea, when CPAP is at the right pressure, worn for the right amount of time, and the right mask fit is there, it's a phenomenal therapy. What we need, though, we have a lot of more folks who are being diagnosed with mild sleep apnea, moderate sleep apnea. The field, if anyone was at the sleep meeting this last time, there's a lot more research, not just on looking at mild, moderate, and severe, but looking at symptom clusters. So sleep apnea with insomnia, sleep apnea with no symptoms, sleep apnea with chronic daytime sleepiness. Better understanding of the symptom clusters and what therapies or combinations of therapies are best. So we really need the research, clinical community, patients, co-investigators driving this agenda to really push things along to say, how can we move the field forward so we can give tailored, personalized therapies to the patients? And when we think about sleep apnea, it's a chronic illness. The whole key is providing the right intervention at the right time. So we really need to help the field deliver what's considered good chronic illness care. So what does all this mean for the ASAA? As a patient advocacy association, like most patient advocacy organizations, focused on community, advocacy, research, and education. I think what we've done really, really well the last couple years is really build the community. The numbers are going through the roof. It's evidenced by the survey we did, some of our unique visitors who are visiting the website, the growth of our Awake program, increasing education to make sure folks know about sleep apnea and its treatment, and then research to help systematize all that, and from that, advocate. So this meeting is a great example of some of the work we're doing. I just wanted to tee up Adam for talking about all the other activities that we're doing. So I'll stop there. Thank you, and thank you to the FDA.
So you can see why Carl's the researcher and he likes to be in the back of the room quiet. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, all our industry sponsors, the FDA stakeholders, all the healthcare and allied professionals in the room. Thank you to one of my mentors, Jill Friedman, for providing us with a slice of what about 10 patients looked like at an Awake meeting in a retired area of Daytona Beach, Florida. What makes that slice of patients interesting is that these are all retirees from around the country that have wound up in Florida. So they're not just all Florida-based. They come from all walks of life. And as you'll see today, as you saw people coming and going in and out of the room, and if you're wondering, we will keep developing the face of patient of our stories, because we wear this disease on our face. You could see us before treatment and you could see us after. And these are people that are being treated, and that's why they have smiles. The ones that aren't being treated, you can't even get them here to take a picture. Will and I showed up at our first ASA meeting about 5-6 years ago, met Mr. Gordon, and it was probably the first time 3 patients were ever at an American Sleep Apnea Association board meeting. Our eyes were blown away by what we saw and what we didn't see and what was going on in the room. And without airing all the dirty laundry, because it doesn't do you good or us good, let's just say that we've taken the bull by the horns, we bootstrapped ourselves, and where we found opportunities, we've evolved and iterated. One of those being our CPAP assistance program. Thanks to the generosity of our manufacturers, we were able to provide machines that were obsolete or gently used to about over 5,000 patients in the last few years. We were able to be an emergency resource during natural disasters with FEMA and Red Cross with that program. And we're now offering a year supply mask renewal program with that program. And when I say we're not doing this to sell, we do this as program fees and donations. We are a nonprofit. We are not a DME. And we are getting full setups in the patient's hands for 1/10 of the price in a 24-hour period. So that means if a patient comes onto our website and they fill out an application, they will get their package the next day as long as they show proof of prescription. And you heard a lot of stories today about how it takes 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks for DMEs to even get back to you. Us as a small little patient association can figure it out. I think the rest of the healthcare community can figure it out as well. We've been privileged enough to be part of what came on with the Affordable Care Act. And I know I'm the last person here, and I know you guys want to run and get out of here, and I know it's Friday. But bear with me. I don't only get to do this once. As part of the Affordable Care Act, we were privileged to be chosen to go help found what was called myapnea.org, or the Sleep Apnea Patient-Centered Outcomes Network. We learned a lot by working with an academic partner and what it's like to do research, what it's like to recruit for research, what it's like to engage for research. And as we got more self-aware and more clear, we then learned that we wanted to be in control of it. Just like any other industry in the world, you cannot design for anything without having the end user in the room. And we're not patients, we're not participants, because every one of us in here sleeps, and we have a sleep component to our lives. With that being said, we took that knowledge and that education, and when Apple came out with their Research Kit platform, we developed an app that you're all free to go download if you have an Apple phone, called Sleep Health. And it's a 2 years plus ongoing longitudinal observational study, or a pilot study, of about 11,600 patients. And we have what we think is the largest cohort of healthy sleepers and non-healthy sleepers. Now you say, well, you guys are the American Sleep Apnea Association. What are you doing with Sleep Health? Well, this is one disease that we don't need to spend zillions and billions of dollars on looking for a cure. We know there's an early prevention and recognition that needs to be implemented. And the fact that it hasn't is a problem in itself. Yes, everybody wants the magic pill. Yes, everybody wants the quick fix. But managing a chronic disease can be done. It has been done. And I hope, my dream is to one day that my daughter is not the poster child for this or the exception, but that all children are being treated. Generations ago, tonsils and adenoids was a common thing. It is no longer, and it's my guess and my hypothesis that is a big contributing factor towards childhood obesity and ADHD right now, which I said earlier today. Our Awake program. So this was it's actually around before the American Sleep Apnea Association. So alert, well, and keeping energetic. Well, if you're sleep deprived and you're tired, God knows that doesn't go hand in hand with you. Even what you heard a lot of stories today about patients that are really compliant with their CPAP therapy. We're still walking through lives as zombies. The first thing I'm sure everyone in this room did today was have their coffee, have their caffeine, or some sort of stimulant. And the first thing they also did was they picked up their phone if they had it in their bedroom. So alert, well, and keeping energetic is a behavioral, so cognitive behavioral issues. It's a lifestyle, it's change, and it's something that we all have to start to do. Now with the advent of technology that we're using to broadcast and disseminate to our communities, the lights, the electricity, we have to go back to respecting the clock, the circadian clock. When the sun goes down, we need to start to power down. When it rises, that's when we need to do the work. Whether there's things in between, that's debatable as far as a couple hundred years ago, but it's just like the food analogy. If your grandparents didn't eat it, we probably shouldn't be eating it either. Thank you. So we talked about the CAP program, we talked about Awake, we talked about sleep health. We have our web assets, sleepapnea.org, Sleeptember, which is our month of awareness this September. And Sleeptember is very much about making sleep a priority in your life after summer, back to school time, back to work time, how it affects you as a family, how it affects you in the workplace, and how it affects your interaction with all of society. We invite you all to participate in it. We haven't found our viral hook like the Movember guys did with growing a beard for male mental health and male prostate health. But with that, you know, as an example, the Movember Foundation raised about $150 million about a year or two ago, and they didn't sit on that money like the more renowned organizations that we all know of as nonprofits. They actually turned that money around and funded 80 studies. So imagine of all the researchers, all the innovators, anybody who wants to try something, imagine if they came to the end users, the patients, and said, hey, we have this great idea, we think we should use it. We could then help develop and design that with you and figure out, find that, what Carlos taught me in the research world, that RLS or that RLF, that rate limiting step. We identified countless rate limiting steps and factors today. And we are the American Sleep Apnea Association, and I could tell you we've been referred to as the Obstructive Sleep Apnea Association. Our job is to make this frictionless. It's to remove the obstructions. The PAP therapy is a stent. All it does is open up our airway. It's helping us with our breathing. We gotta verify that we can measure the sleep and what's going on in the sleep stages the right way. And we have a whole litany of issues to deal with. Going back to Dr. O'Callaghan's mention of how undiagnosed, there are so many of our patients, this is not a disease, this is a syndrome. Depending upon which door that you walk through, that's the proverbial treatment route that you're gonna get. You walk through the dentist, you're gonna get the oral appliance. You walk through the ENT, you're most likely gonna get the surgery or the allergies. You walk through the pulmonologist, you're gonna get the CPAP. The cardiovascular doctors are just getting up to speed. We're privileged to have Deb McCall and Stop AFib here. We know that 80 to 90% of AFib patients have undiagnosed, untreated sleep apnea. Is that a fair estimate? So the cardiovascular community, the diabetes community, you can't manage any of these other comorbidities until you can manage the sleep or the sleep apnea, either or. So if we've done anything today is that I feel like, and what I heard from Dr. O'Callaghan and what I heard from Carl, as the professionals in the room and I as the layman, is that we all understand that we need to start looking at the whole picture. I want to thank my wife, who none of this meeting would be done without her. We felt like we just planned a wedding and we didn't know who was coming on the bride or the groom's side. I also feel like we sort of arranged the first ever engagement of the FDA with some of the internal divisions with the device and the pharma side. So we're happy to be the first disease that you chose to use to do that with. We hope to see more of that. We're all about inclusivity. There's no reason to exclude. Everyone sleeps, so at that point, there is no exclusion criteria, no matter what age. This is a cradle-to-grave syndrome, and we need to start making it a priority. It's not a soft disease. It's not Homer Simpson snoring. It's not Jackie Gleason back in the day. It's not that type of guy. This is a disease that, man, if my doctor, Dr. Gimeno, who, you know, I wouldn't be here alive today without him, who identified pediatric sleep apnea in 1972, he literally told me if my adenoids weren't taken out at about 2 years old, my IQ would have been 70 points lower by the time I got to adolescence. And that's a scary thought. And right now, Dr. Gimeno's, you know, a little north of 80, and I can honestly tell you, in the sleep world, I don't know who the next Dr. Gimeno is, and that scares me, especially after coming from a national sleep conference. So And he's scared because the field is not taking it upon themselves. We need to make sleep a primary issue. It's got to be with the pediatricians. It's got to be with the family physicians. It's got to be in all aspects of life. It's not just how did you sleep, what kind of sleep, not how long do you sleep, what's the quality. That's a little bit of my soapbox. So I thank my beautiful wife. I thank my daughter who is not here, but is home with my mother-in-law, who gets mad at me every time I ask her to open her mouth, because I'm sure a few of you heard before, we could look in your airways and within 15 to 20 seconds, and I'll leave this with you, and hopefully you absorb it. We're looking at your Malin-Potty score, which is the different classes of how much airway and room you have in the back of your mouth. We're looking at scarred cheeks. We're looking at scalloped tongues, and we're looking for signs of bruxism, and we're looking for recessed chins. That's all we really need to identify sleep disorder breathing or sleep apnea. And the one other thing that really hasn't been mentioned today is we talked about mild, moderate, severe. There's a whole other classification that insurance companies don't necessarily recognize, but that's upper airways resistance syndrome, which is what a lot of the Asian population and anywhere that's where rice is the main ingredient or supplement of their diet are developing. Over the years, we have not developed our airways. We've learned to talk and communicate, so our airways have gotten smaller. Our noses are for breathing, and our mouths are for eating and talking. I'd like to thank you, because I wouldn't know where we'd be without you. So. I hope this is not the last. I hope this is the first and the beginning of many, many more important meetings, gatherings of our communities with stakeholders in an inclusive, collaborative manner, to where we can start to make a difference and start to wipe out these comorbidities in these generations, because this is not something we need to spend billions and zillions on looking for cures. This is something we know now and we've known for 10, 20 years. And it's incumbent and it's imperative on the entire healthcare community to start preaching it. It might not be the money maker that everybody wants, but if we start treating this now, we are going to the benefits for society economically are going to be immeasurable. So thank you very much for coming. Enjoy your Friday. And that's all, folks.